Once again, we are very honored and privileged to be before you this morning as we have this opportunity of worship. And we pray that we are all here, as has already been expressed in a variation of ways and comments, that we're here for the purpose of accomplishing this in spirit and in truth. In other words, we do it with the right attitude, and that we do it according to God's holy and divine will. Next Lord's Day morning, Brother Alan Hutchinson will be before you delivering a lesson from God's holy and divine word. And Nancy and I, we covet your prayers for us. We will be flying out to Austin, Texas on this coming Friday. The only reason we covet your prayers is, because the Lord says, "And lo, I'll be with you always." And we're going to be a little higher than being low, I think. So we would covet your prayers because of that. And pray that we get back home safely. But we do look forward to the opportunities that we have in being before you and being able to deliver lessons that would be beneficial. This lesson this morning is not anything new to you. It's going to be a little different in relative to the layout of my lesson. In all due respects to this particular day, January the 23rd, that started back in 1973. But before we get to that, when we talk about abortion, it is not, once again, a subject matter that we hear about very much, is it? And when we do hear about it, we always have, obviously, negative concerns, and rightfully so. It's not one of those positive lessons, although we can find some things positive relative to statistics of our day that might be encouraging in some way. But that would be the only thing that we could find positive about it. But as we take into consideration abortion, a nation with blood on its hands, the idea is not anything new. Once again, as was read from Scripture in Psalms 106, and they served their idols. I could go no farther than that. We already know and see and understand that what's involved here is paganism in regards to the idol worship of that day. I don't know that I can give you an exact graphic as to what Moloch, an idolatrous god, looked like. I've seen pictures, graphs of it or whatever. But he was also a god that when he was worshiped, that human sacrifice would take place. Now, I've heard two different descriptions of this idol. One was that his arms were laid out together, stretched out, and elevated to some degree. And above those arms was a hole. And that those of that day that wanted to sacrifice their children, they would lay them into the arms of Moloch, this idolatrous god, and they would literally slide down those arms into this hole, which they would drop into an inferno in his stomach. Or, I've heard another description to where the arms were stretched out but separate, and the hole was available in his stomach. And those that wanted to sacrifice their children would literally walk up and throw their children into that inferno. Either way, really doesn't matter. The idea is here of parents who were willing to sacrifice their children to an idolatrous god. Now I want to ask you a very simple question. How depraved does someone have to be able to do such? We don't hear of that in our modern day of age relative to that type of sacrifice. No, we do not. But even here, David said through inspiration that they were a nation that was polluted with blood. Now, when you think of the word polluted, what do you think of? How many of you have ever walked upon maybe a small body of water and it had this film over it, or had this green algae growing on it or whatever, and it looked disgusting, didn't it? And basically, we find bodies of water similar that are polluted with whatever it may be. It's not something that is evident for us to want to dive into and go swimming. I doubt that we want to try to catch a fish out of there and consume it, no doubt, because of the very idea of pollution itself. But a nation, in a figure of speech, polluted with blood simply means that the totality of that nation was covered with it in the mind and in the eyes of God. Now, I want you to look at something, and I want this to remain in your mind throughout this entire lesson. Here is that of an unborn child. And for those today, the feminists in particular, I would that they would no longer say it's about me and my body. My friends, do you see that? That is a different body than the individual that's carrying it. It is a different human being altogether. It has nothing to do with the body of the individual carrying that child. It has to do with the child. That's what's paramount here. It's not necessarily, could be, about 1% of the cases in regards to that of the life of the one carrying the child, but primarily it is all about the child itself and whether or not that child is going to survive or whether it's going to succumb to that of a nation that is polluted with blood. The things that I have to say, some of them I know are a bit graphic in the vocabulary of it, but then again, very much necessary also. But as I said, on January, it's actually the 23rd, I've got the 22nd here, pardon the mistake. But anyway, 1973, here we find this alias individual referred to as Jane Roe. Norma McCorvey was her name. And she went to trial against a Dallas attorney by the name of Henry B. Wade. Wade versus Roe. That's how this came about. Now, before I go any farther, I don't know what you know about McGarvey. You may have read about her in some things, some areas. Then again, maybe you haven't. It would appear to me, knowing nothing about it, that she was one that was wanting the abortion and therefore went to court as a result of it. She did not go to court for herself. She went to court representing the pro-abortionists of that day. As a matter of fact, she was not even pregnant. Now that's how the irony of all of this has come about. As a matter of fact, McCarvey, in what I have read about her, was not interested in a male relationship at all, but she was more interested in a female relationship in life. She was a lesbian. But yet pretending as such because the pro-abortionists paid her to do this. She had had financial problems. She had jumped from one job to another, living from paycheck to paycheck. Here was a chance to gain monetarily, and so this she did. And look at the results of it as to where we are today. As a matter of fact, later in her life, she supposedly got religion. I guess I could say it that way, because religion is not something you get, it's something you do, as a matter of fact. But with her, she just got it, and that was it. So once that happened, she made a decision then to go against her initial concerns about abortion. And now, all of a sudden, she is against abortion. She is with the anti-abortionist. And guess what? They are now, or have, paid her to become public with this, which money is what it was all about for her, and that she did. So therefore, she was out. She would be marching here and marching there. She had speaking engagements that she would go to. She was receiving monetary funds in regards to all that she did. That's what it was all about. But I don't know what she died of. But on her deathbed, there was an interview with a news commentator the very day that she died. And her comment was that she regretted the fact that she went against the abortion movement. She regretted that. She wished she had stayed with the pro-abortionists. On her deathbed, this is what she finally said. This is where her true feelings were in regards to this, even though she had never had an abortion. So she was nothing but a hypocrite. I'll get that out in a minute. Hypocritical is what I wanted to say. And in that regards, though, we find to this day circumstances that are devastating unto us. So the court's decision in this case was that the Ninth Amendment in stating that the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny disparage others, rather, retained by the people, protected a person's right to privacy. That's what it was all about. So in other words, I could do this, I could have an abortion, no one needs to know, it's no one else's concern. So the Supreme Court ruled that a woman in constitution with their physician, or consultation rather, with their physician, have a constitutional protection because of all of this, the circumstance that the court approved it as such, a right rather to have the abortion in the early stages of pregnancy, that is, before viability, free from government interference. This is what they were after. As you know and I know, every movement that is basically against the decency of humanity, every movement that is against the decency of New Testament Christianity, they have what is referred to as a manifesto. The humanistic manifesto, in other words. They lay out exactly, step by step, a plan that they will go forth with. The homosexual community has a manifesto. They laid out a step-by-step plan in which they would go forth with, including the government, obviously, in all of this, including legislation in all of this. So it works the same way with that of abortion. The abortionist has had a manifesto, a step-by-step. They knew they couldn't do it overnight. They knew it would take a while, but when it did, we see the fruition of it today. So the Supreme Court ruled that a woman in the Constitution, with her physician, consultation, once again, with her physician, had this right to do so. And in 92 then, the court reaffirmed the right to abortion in Planned Parenthood versus Casey. So what would happen? Occasionally, there would be those that would stand up against it. There would be those that would do so with such concern and energy and vigilance that there would be other circumstances to where the legislatures would have to come in and either revamp or reinforce certain laws that had already been in place or make new laws in regards to this. 38 states currently enforce parent consent or notification laws for minors seeking abortion. 38 states. Well, guess what? 21 of those states require parental consent only. The parent says yes, that's all that is necessary. 11 states require parental notification only, not the consent of the parent. 6 states require both parental consent and notification. Now that's 38 states out of our 50. That's not a whole lot, we might say, to be concerned about. But what we have here, though, is within the confines of state government, even they do not agree on how this should go forth. So there's different circumstances depending on the state in which you live. Congress has barred the use of federal Medicaid funds to pay for abortion, except when the woman's life would be endangered by a full-term pregnancy or in case of rape or incest. Now, within that realm of rape or incest, this is only 1% of all of the circumstances of abortion that an abortion literally goes forth. So Congress has barred that circumstance. Okay, 17 of the states use public funds to pay for abortion for some poor women, but only 4 do so voluntarily. They don't want to, but some of them don't, but these 4 do. And the rest do so under court order. They have to, because ordered by the federal or state courts to do so. So about 13% of all abortions in the United States are paid with what? With public funding. In other words, virtually from all regards of state government. At least 13% of it. 20 states have laws that could be used to restrict the legal status of abortion. 20 of them, but do they use them? 4 states have laws that automatically banned abortion if Roe versus Wade actually were overthrown. They have them in place. They've never done away with them. Waiting, no doubt, in some respects, that if this was ever overthrown, they would not have to go back and re-legislate all of these concerns. They would already be there. But because Roe versus Wade is in place, they cannot use them. The government will not allow it. 13 states retain their unenforced pre-Roe abortion bans, and 7 states have laws that express their intent to restrict the right of legal abortion to the maximum extent permitted by the U.S. Supreme Court relative to the absence of Roe versus Wade. There are those who stand up against this atrocity. There are those who go forth and would say, keep abortion legal. So we have both sides of the issue. I don't know what side of the issue you may be on. I've never interviewed anyone here personally, individually, in regards to that. I would assume that because we are Christians, we are children of God, that we then would be on the negative side of the ledger in regards to abortion. I'm assuming that. But I would pray that all of God's children would be just there. In 2014, an estimated 926,200 abortions were performed in the United States, 12% fewer than 2011. Now, as I said a moment ago, in regards to the statistics of today, there is some light at the end of the tunnel. The number of abortions are going down, and how thankful we need to be for that, if nothing else alone. In 2014, we see what the ratings were here as such as we go forth, but 14.6 abortions per 1,000 women, ages 15 to 44, representing a 14% decline over this period. That's some good news. That's not where it needs to be. It needs to be 100%. That's what we need to be praying for as such. The number of clinics providing abortions declined 6% between 11 and 14, and declines were steepened in the Midwest 22% and the South 13%. Well, we have percentages all the time in regards to whatever it may be. But when we start looking at something of a moral issue, and that we're able to see relative to these statistics, what we have here, look at 1996 on the bottom. 1.36 million abortions in 1996. This was when the abortion issue was really hitting, we might say, the pinnacle of its concern in this nation. But what we have seen since then is a decline, even to this point, 2014, and this is the last overall statistic I have, under 1 million. Is that good? That's good. Can it be better? It needs to be better. Because since 1973, the number of abortions per year, the number of abortions per day, as we look at those numbers, 2,600 infant babies, children, human beings will be aborted today, as a matter of fact. This goes on 7 days a week. It's not a 5-day-a-week concern, but it's every day of the week. So an estimated 60 million children have been aborted since Roe versus Wade. I have a list here of 26 states. You can take the population of those states, add them together, and you know what you have? You have a total, a number, in other words, 1.94 million in regards to the number of abortions relative to, there's more abortions rather than the population of those states. Now, the number of deaths, as we take into consideration all of them, and I'll not give you all, they're there. Heart disease, the number one death in our nation. But when we look at heart disease and we look at other physical elements and circumstances that causes death, with all of those added together, 1.94 million have died, as that related to the number of abortions of 60. Well, since 1973, 60 million was a rounded off number. The actual number, 58,586,256. Does that number seem large? I know you've heard this before, just by explanation, but the graphic that I have on the right there is the number of wars that we as a nation have been involved in since 1775. 250 years ago. We've had 1,314,000 men and women die in regards to service to our nation in 250 years. In less than 50 years, we have had about 60 million children to die through abortion. We say that Adolf Hitler murdered 6 million Jews, and how do we refer to him? We call him one that was mad, or one that was evil, or one that was sick mentally. But here was one that hated the Jewish nation, the Jewish people. Here was one that had the idea to annihilate all of them if possible. And he is used time after time after time in the circumstance of how demented that he really must have been in what he allowed to be done relative to humanity and the genocide of it. But then again, they were put in gas chambers, they were shot, however that may have been accomplished. Here we have a variation of ways and means in which these young children have been aborted. That of suction, as a tube is inserted and the child is literally mangled, if you please, and a suction tube draws that mangled body into a container. All of these with the salt poisoning or the saline solution, which is injected into the child, and the blood literally dries up, coagulates, and the child dies. But one of them that really bothers me more is the prostaglandin chemical. My friends, that is an inflammatory chemical. And that is injected into the child, and they are literally scalded to death. Can you imagine a mother allowing that? But even more, can you imagine a professional individual to allow such to take place or to even do so without any remorse whatsoever? Abortion today is all about the money. That's what they are after. And they can take these fetuses also, and they can take their body parts, and their body parts are sold. Even stem cell research is a result of those children being aborted. Now, I realize there's maybe other ways of accomplishing some of these things, but nonetheless, these are primary in that concern. And when we take into consideration all of these being inhumane in and of themselves, what is the age group that we're looking at? Now, I'm not referencing this in regards to any particular age. This is just what's available in statistics. But as young as 15 years old, and I know there have been younger that have had abortions, but 15 to 19 is one of the larger percentages, 25 to 29, 22. But look at 20 to 24, 32% at that age. And why is that? Well, between 20 and 24, this is a very active age for young people, maybe just getting out of college, maybe not even in college. But their sexual life begins raging also during this period of life in youth. And they are those individuals who have no concern and desire no control over that in any way whatsoever. So what we have here, and I'm going to use the word in case we don't understand it, what we have here is a major concern of nothing but fornication. That's all it is. Those who are willing to go forth in these sexual activities of life, enjoying their life as such, but when all of a sudden they realize that they're expecting a child, it's time to back out of this. It's time to get out of it. It's time to take into consideration there are other things to do. Now, I have no regard here relative to ethnicity, other than the fact that the statistics that are available. But according to race, 349,857 white women will abort a child this year. That's the largest percentage, 57%. Over 200,000 of black women. 32,000 of others, whatever race that may be. And then 17,000 that are unknown. In other words, those that have an abortion of which there is no record of being kept. Never married, 64%. Married, 18%. And divorced, 9.4%. And here's what's interesting to me. Among so-called Protestants of the day, the highest percentage is among those who profess Christianity, 37%. I'm going to say one thing for the Jewish people, 1.3% of Jewish women will have an abortion. But then Catholicism, are you kidding me? 31%? Which really was astounding in all given concerns. Evangelicals, 18% per se. Now, when I look at those statistics, I wonder, maybe you will too, are these people being taught anything at all about abortion? Are they being taught about the idea of really the murder of a child? The taking of a life in the hideous ways in which this is accomplished? Less than $15,000 rather, income status, those in that lower grade, the poor, 28%. But what is amazing also, 30 to 60,000, we could say, the upper middle class, basically, 38% of those are the ones involved in this concern. Health risk, 6%. Social issues, 93% of the calls. And those social issues, what are they? Well, having a baby could change my life. Okay? Well, I can't afford the baby now. Or the relationship problems, I'll be a single parent. You see, with all of these that we could read, the majority of them in the social ideas is this. Then why are you allowing yourself to get involved in the concerns of fornication, knowing the possibilities of what's going to happen or could happen, and then end up with having this child aborted? Why can we not see beyond that concept? Not ready for responsibility. That's probably true. to keep sexual activity secret. They don't want mom and dad to know or others. Not mature enough, yet mature enough to go through with the concerns of fornication, obviously. Doesn't want more children, husband or partner wants it, but so on and so forth. What do we see? Excuse after excuse after excuse relative to the society of two people in their concerns relative to a circumstance that they found themselves in. Now, we must agree, as I've already said, the number of abortions per 1,000 women aged 14 or 15 rather to 44, there has been a decline. That is the good news, but it's not down far enough. The decline, once again, must go to zero. Well, what is it that God has to say about all of this? Psalms 139, we've already read from Psalms 106. For you formed my inward parts. This is David talking to God. You covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise you, for I am fearful and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and that my soul knows very well. What is the psalmist saying here? The psalmist is saying very simply that the conception of a child, which is God's circumstance of bringing children into this world within the proper realms of marriage, as a matter of fact. But what is he saying about this? Look at what God has done. Look at God's part in this. Look at how God has, in his creation, provided the circumstance of a child to be preserved for a 9-month period and then be brought forth in birth. And the beauty of it, wonderfully made. This is how God looks at that unborn child. Psalms 139, verse 13 through 16. My frame was not hidden from you. In other words, God knew when he was conceived. When I was made in secret and skillfully wrought in the lowest parts of the earth, your eyes saw my substance, being yet unformed. And in your book, they all were written. The days fashioned fashioned for me, when as yet there were none of them. My word. I read these time after time, and I think about, the wonderful and the beautiful nature of God and what he has done for that of the unborn child. Even the prophet Isaiah. Thus saith the Lord, who made you and formed you from the womb. Who will help you? Fear not, O Jacob, my servant, and you, Jeshurun, whom I have chosen. God already knew, talking to Isaiah, about these individuals, not born yet, but would be. Thus says the Lord, your Redeemer, and he who formed you from the womb. Once again, God involved in this circumstance. Jeremiah, the prophet, before I formed you, God says to Jeremiah, in the womb, I knew you. The providence and the foreknowledge of God was already in place. Job, did not he who made me in the womb make them? Did he not make all as such? Did not the same one fashion us in the womb? Referring once again to God. Why then have you brought me out of the womb? Job here complaining that he'd ever been born as such, because in the womb he was protected. Well, that's not the case today, is it? Oh, that I had perished and no eyes had seen me. Job was suffering, yes. He was in agony and pain, yes. But he knew that while he had been in that womb, that God was taking care of him. Psalms 127, behold, children are a heritage from the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. You see, there's a positive side to this in every respect. In Exodus, the men fight and they hurt a woman with child so that she gives birth prematurely, yet no harm follows. He shall surely be punished according to the woman's husband's imposes on him, to whatever the punishment that may be. Once again, no harm was brought to the child, but it created childbirth to go forth prematurely. But if any harm follows, then you shall give life for life. That's the sanctity of life of the unborn child. Here we find, and I don't want to read all of this, but I want to highlight some of this for you. Individuals who are lovers of themselves, lovers of money, unthankful, unholy, unloving, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good, headstrong, and lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. Out of all of these, I want you to take into consideration one of them. Unloving, without natural affection is what that literally means. How can one who has become conceived with that of a child arbitrarily go forth to have the life of that child eliminated because of a social matter in her life? Unloving, without natural affection. Mothers, look at your children that you have, if you have children, and think about your natural love for them. If you do not have children, then think about the natural love that your mother had for you as a child. And you'll see the similar circumstance as such. Can a woman forget her nursing child and not have compassion on the son of her womb? They can sacrifice their sons and their daughters to demons and shed innocent blood, the blood of their sons and daughters, whom they sacrificed to the idols of Canaan, and the land was polluted with blood. What a horrible circumstance that makes for the idea, once again, of a child and God in his concern in regards to it. So, as a result, millions of sons and daughters are being sacrificed to the idols of humanism, to the idols of selfishness, to that of greed and nothing but greed today. And our nation has become polluted once again with blood. You see, there are those who regret. Out of guilt, out of depression, whatever it may be. But yet there are those who still have a seared conscience in regards of it. I want to say, and very hurriedly, once again, there is an institution, Evans B. Donaldson Adoption Institution. This is a path in which is available unto unwed expectant mothers, adoption. Why not go through with the concerns of the pregnancy, bring that child into the world, and then put that child up for adoption if one of those social concerns does not meet your criteria? Why carry through with the hideous concerns to that of abortion itself? Once again, the abortion or the adoption rates, though, are lowering and lowering and lowering because the children are not there to be adopted. They're being aborted. Babies, which must have been adopted prior to 73, were being aborted after 1973. 1998 survey found about 2 million women aged 15 to 44 had sought to adopt a child. But guess what? Only 127,000 plus children were available. But yet there were 2 million women wanting to adopt one. What happened to them? They were aborted. So 2 to 3% of the more than 1 million teenagers who become pregnant this year will place their child up for adoption. Only 2 to 3. That's not much. Quick question. What if you were born like I in the 40s, or in the 50s, or the 60s, to that of an unwed mother teenager, or unwed teenager, I should say, and then later adopted? There may be someone here that happened to. But let me ask this. What if abortion was legal then? My mother and dad knew that they were going to have twins when us boys were born. What they didn't know was there was a third one. They had no idea there were triplets. I guess evidently I was the surprise. Have been ever since, but nonetheless. But to take into consideration parents that already had 4 children, and then boom, 3 more coming along, the joy of knowing the twins were coming was there. My dad had already prepared for that mentally. But when the 3rd one was born, he went to the nursery and he looked in at that nursery, staring at us 3 boys, 6 weeks premature in incubators, and he never spoke for 2 hours. And I had a relative telling me this, and she went up to him and said, Mitchell, what's on your mind? He said, I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to feed 3 more mouths. That's what he was trying to figure it out. You see, it wasn't the idea, well, let's just go ahead and have them aborted and we'll not worry about it. My dad was trying to figure out a plan ahead, how to make the reservations and concerns for such that he would be facing as the provider for our family, along with many other fathers today, obviously doing the same thing. Abortion, a nation polluted with blood. As we end our thoughts for this morning, I thought for some time on how to end this lesson. And it's not always that you can end a lesson such as this on a good note, but we can in this respect, in which I'll give you in a moment. But this I want to leave you with. I want you to go back to that frame that I showed you of that child yet unborn with a thumb in its mouth. And if I ask you as a congregation that we have a moment of silence for every individual child that has been aborted since 1973, there would be total silence for the next 100 years. That's how serious this issue is. So how do we offer an invitation as such? We can only do so in the respect of knowing that sin is sin. It doesn't matter